and the topic for today is learning from experience. Turns out we're not very good at it. Even though we have practical mechanisms that have evolved over eons of time to learn from experience, right? But we learn from experience through direct feedback. So I touch a hot stove, I get burnt. The brain says, really, it will burn you all the time, let me try it again. You try it again, it burns you again. Okay, you make that chemical connection. The problem with the reality that we face is frequently the effects are far away from the causes, right? And that makes it much more difficult for the same mechanism that we've developed so successfully over time to learn from experience. So the presentation outline is going to be following the sequence that we follow whenever we do a research project with an organization. You basically start off by saying what's the question or the problem that you're trying to answer or solve. You then try to acknowledge who has tried to solve this problem before and try to learn from them what worked and what didn't work. Or people are very quick to say, this is they wrong, we're right, without actually paying respect to acknowledging what problem they were originally solving, and whether that is about MRP systems or balanced scorecard or any of these things that we've picked up has got some fundamental flaws, is to really pay respect. And you pay respect by understanding those things better than the inventor themselves. So acknowledging some of the giants that have come before us, then make sure you're not dealing with what Ellie lovingly called a chupchik, a problem that is small and insignificant. How do I check the extent and consequences of the problem to make sure it's an important problem to solve? The next step, of course, is looking at the hypothesis, coming up with an hypothesis about both the cause and the solution and figuring out a practical way to go and test it. Feynman said, one of the most beautiful quotes for me is, I don't care how clever you are, I don't care how beautiful your theory is, I don't care how many people agree with you. If it doesn't get confirmed in experiment, you're wrong. So unless we go and test and design experiments that are falsifiable, which is a good criteria for any scientific theory, it has to be falsifiable. If I believe in something, I need to design a test in a way that I can check whether it's wrong or not. I can't design a test to prove that I'm right. I have to design the test in a way that can check whether I'm wrong or not. I'll share with you some of the examples and some of the other case studies that we've got involved, and hopefully there's some time for questions. So the research question is, we seldom learn from experience, frequently learn the wrong lessons. Because, why? What's the hypothesis? I mentioned that there's some acknowledgements that I want to bring with who has really tried to solve this problem before. The problem of why don't we learn from experience? Of course, the scientific method, everybody that's contributed to the scientific method probably should get the biggest acknowledgement, because that is how science are learning all the time. They treat everything as an experiment. They have no expectations that their first prototype will work. And every time they test it, they go and see what worked, what didn't work. Of course, from our side, we are very different, right? We expect our prototypes to work the first time around. We fall in love. We think we found our soulmate, and are then desperately depressed when the first prototype turns out not to work exactly as we planned. So there's a lot that we can learn from science, and I'll share with you some additional insights. But others that have really tried to look at this problem in terms of developing root cause analysis methods or reflection methods is, of course, Sheward and Deming with their PDA cycle, Sakisha Toyoda with the 5 Whys, the US Army's after-action review, Japan's Hansei, which is a reflection, self-reflection. And of course then Dr. Eli Goldratt for all of his support, and probably like most of the TOC experts here that have come in close contact with Eli, a lot of pressure to say, don't waste your life, do things that are valuable, and this is one of the areas that I'm particularly interested in. So he encouraged me to really go deeper into this. So let's start with the extent and consequences of the problem. Unfortunately, success is not all around us. Failure is all around us. 99.9% of all the species that have ever walked the planet is gone. They're gone forever. But it's not just species. It's companies, it's government policies. It's common that things fail all the time. The statistics are not very good. 50% of first marriages end in divorce. If people were learning from experience, what would you expect from second marriages and third marriages? Not that it's 60% and 70% failure rate, right? Kind of already a validation that somehow we walk away with a lesson that might not be true. Like, what happened? No, I just got married too young. Really? That's the cause of the problem? Not sure if that's the cause of the problem. Maybe there's something else involved. Interesting one, I don't know how many of you have read the book Change or Die. The author starts off with a very interesting question. He said, if you were really given the choice whether to change or die, what would you do? And the most obvious answer is, of course I'd change. Turns out it's wrong. Only 1 out of 10 patients, on average, that are given this choice after their heart bypass surgery, that you need to change your way of living, else you will die. Only 1 out of 10 actually makes the choice to change it. And the other 9 dies. Right? I see some laughter, maybe some people that can associate with the difficulty to overcome this inertia. Part of what we're doing is trying to, of course, understand why that is. And one of the hypotheses I'm investigating with one of the biggest medical facilities in the US is, what if the main cause for that is not ignorance, right? Which is what most of the time we think it is. They just don't know how dangerous it is. Of course they know. They've been told by the doctor and by their wives many 100 times over again. What are the main causes? Entitlement. To say, you're kidding me, right? I've invested my whole life to get to this position, to eat what I want, do what I want, and now you want me to stop? You're kidding me, right? Maybe that could be one of the main causes why people find it so difficult to stop. Only 2% of weight loss programs are successful. Really bad statistic. Really good book to read is What You Can Change and What You Can't Change. The founder of positive psychology, Dr. Martin Seligman, wrote this book. And they had 16 things in your life where research has now confirmed whether you can change them or not. Turns out weight is one of the things that you can't change. Only thing that you can do is make it worse. We have a natural equilibrium point that the body is trying to control the weight. Every time you go on diet, what does the body learn? I can't trust this guy to give me food when I need it. Better build up a bit of a buffer for the next time they go crazy again. See, the body learns from experience, but not always the right lessons. Of course, there are many myths that when you look at it today that are so easily falsifiable, and people keep on believing them. We seldom also capitalize on our successes. So when I'm talking about learning from experience, I'm not only talking about learning from failures. I'm also talking about learning from successes. Practically, the first one is when things don't work as well as we had hoped. The second one is when things worked better than we hoped. Do we pay attention to say, why the hell did that happen? I had no expectation that this job would be so great, and now it turns out to be the best thing that's ever happened to me. I had no idea that this product will sell so much, and it has. Why? What was the core assumptions that our low expectation was based on that has now been proven to be invalid? Very few authors, musicians, entrepreneurs, and others ever repeat their first successes, right? Including Goldratt. If you look at the sale of the books, if you want to know some of the sales, probably Nicholas might share with you, is that consistently the goal is still outselling all the other books combined. Why is that? So this is the first question. Why don't we learn? Well, it turns out that the most obvious answer is most of us don't even try. Why wouldn't you try to learn from experience? Something turned out not to work as you expected. What could be your excuse, a valid excuse? Denial. It might be so painful to look at this thing that didn't work out that you block yourself from seeing how bad it is, right? And it turns out we have a fantastic coping mechanism to do that. We are actually much better to cope with really bad things that happen to us because we actually can erase them to a large degree from our memory. We're not so good at simple, small things that happen to us. So one of the problems is we don't try to learn from experience. This is like building a prototype and not even trying to figure out what worked and what didn't work. So of course, that's the most obvious solution. It's try, at least try. Look for the expectation gaps that you have, treating your decisions as experiments, and see if you can learn something from it. Why did it work worse than expected or better than expected? The second mistake that we make is we try, but we don't learn anything new. And part of the problem here is we've got an unbelievable validation bias in the brain. The brain is, in fact, constantly looking for validating what we believe. It is not programmed to invalidate what we believe, because then it will put us into chaos, and that's not a nice feeling, that when you realize you were wrong. So it's very good at validating what we believe. Even if we try to learn from experience, don't be surprised when you say, I knew it all along. Right? Knew I should never have married him or her. Right? We have this incredible bias towards validation. We try, but we learn the wrong lesson. And lastly, we try, we learn the right lesson, but then we don't fully capitalize on it in the various aspects of our life. So imagine a person that suffers really from not feeling worthy, right? This person probably in the workplace will be very unlikely to go up to his boss and ask for the promotion that they deserve, right? Do you agree? They'd probably be as likely to have the courage to walk up to the girl that they really fancy at the school in the hall when there's a dance to say, will you dance with me? So when I learned the lesson from a small example that I expected the worst and then it turned out not to be that bad, that the worst that could happen is they can say no. What do I do to apply that same lesson in all the various aspects of my life? That's what number 4 is about. Is we learn the right lesson, but then we don't change the behavior and we don't capitalize on that lesson in the other aspects of our life. So why do we make these mistakes? Is there a way to reduce them? George Bernard Shaw said we learn from experience that men never learn from experience. He didn't talk about women, but he was quite convinced that men almost never learn from experience. Deming said learning from experience is not compulsory. Neither is survival, of course. And Peter Senge was the first one in systems thinking, at least, to try to understand some of the practical obstacles to learning from experience. And what he said is learning faster than our competitors is our only remaining sustainable competitive advantage. But there's a major obstacle due to the delays and errors in our feedback system. Right? As I mentioned, there's long lags between the government putting a policy in place and actually checking whether that policy has really worked. Right? Did it actually increase jobs? Did it actually reduce poverty? Did it provide more access to the health system or to education? As long as there's a very long lag, and there are many factors that get involved, it's very difficult to learn from experience. One way of trying to solve this problem is then to dive into the psychology and to try and identify all the factors that make it difficult for us to learn from experience. The bad news is that they are discovering new factors all the time. So you could really make a life study out of this and get nowhere closer to learning from experience. Because the fact that I know what are the main causes doesn't really help me unless I know how to overcome it. Do you agree? Very interesting to go and learn more about them, but they don't actually help me to overcome this problem of how do I learn from experience. So I said, well, who is really good at learning from experience? It's, of course, the scientist. How do we know that? Because you just look around you and you see the advancements in science that has taken place. So science is discovering new stuff all the time. And they have fast feedback. Sometimes the feedback is not that fast, but there's feedback loops because we test what works, what doesn't work. So let's see what the advice is about how do you become an outstanding scientist. Goldratt shared this in the foreword of the goal. He said this very simply, finally and most importantly, I wanted to show with this book, The Goal, that we can all be outstanding scientists. The secret of being a good scientist, I believe, lies not in our brain power. We have enough, we simply need to look at reality, think logically and precisely about what we see. And he actually codified it. He said that the scientific method just consists of 2 very simple steps. Step number 1, have the courage to face inconsistencies. What do we mean by an inconsistency? Simply a gap between our expectation and reality. So how do scientists deal with this? They predict, according to their theory, that this planet or star will be there. When it's not there, what do they do? The first thing that they do, especially if they have confidence in their theory, like an Einstein or Feynman, is they don't challenge the theory first. The first thing they challenge is our measurement correct? Once they've checked that, then they say maybe there's something wrong with the theory. Right? So courage to face inconsistencies is simply looking at reality and saying, I expected this to happen, it turned out it didn't. Either it was better or significantly worse. The second step is then to challenge the basic assumptions around that. And I would add in there the wisdom to know which assumptions to challenge. And this combination of courage and wisdom is kind of important. One without the other is a very interesting life. Right? In a framework of theory of constraints, we have 5 simple questions. Why change? We seldom try to learn from our or others' experiences. When we do, we frequently learn the wrong lesson. What to change? Our poor understanding of the practical and psychological barriers to try to learn from important expectation gaps and to ensure we learn and apply the right lessons. 2, what to change? People learn how the scientific mindset and method can provide a fun, simple, and powerful way to view any decision or change simply as an experiment and to analyze each of these experiments on what worked and what didn't work and see what was the basic assumptions. How do we do it? A very simple process that I'm recommending and that we've been testing in a number of real-life cases. Start off by saying, what's the important expectation gap? Come up with a basic hypothesis. And there's 2 ways to come up with an hypothesis. One way is that you start with the problem and you build downwards, which is traditionally what we do with a current reality tree, right? Start with undesirable effects. You try to connect them all together. You're building downwards to find out the root cause for the problem. Make sense? Most root cause analysis follow that technique. They start with a problem and they work downwards. What I'm proposing is a different strategy, is to start with the expectation that we had and work downwards to see what must have been in place and what must have been done to have realized that expectation. We want to see if that maybe is a faster and more reliable way to learn the right lessons. And then lastly is to apply this learning from experience process on itself, right? So every time we're applying it, we're trying to learn what worked, what didn't work. If something isn't simple, people are not going to use it. It's not quick, they're not going to use it. If it's not fun, they're not going to use it. So those are the key things that we've been trying to test as we're going through. So let's look at what it looks like graphically. So you start off with a mystery, right? The mystery is, I had an expectation, some kind of desired effect. I expected this product to increase my sales by 10% within a year. My reality was different. The outcome is different. Sales didn't go up or only went up marginally by 1 or 2%. So this is the starting point, is you pick anything where there's an expectation gap, but you try to be very explicit about what was your expectation and what was the actual outcome. Next step, make sure it's important, because you don't want to waste your time on something that's unimportant. So you check, if we had realized the expectation, how would this have increased my goal units for the organization or for me as a person? Do I still want it? That's basically what I'm asking here. At the same time, on the right-hand side, what if nothing changes? What if this becomes my reality, stays my reality? Is it really bad for me or the whole system? So when I get yes boxes in both of those, I know I'm dealing with an important problem. This should take all of a few minutes in the goal. Then, as I mentioned, rather than trying to build downwards from the undesirable effect through something like a 5Y process or current reality tree process, my suggestion is we build downwards from the desired effect. It's almost like building a future reality tree of what must have been in place for us to have realized this. But to do it very simple, right? The simplest way to do it is literally just do bullet points. And you're going down to say, for me to have realized this expectation, what was the intermediate effects that must have existed for this to have happened? Right? So for a new offer to the market to have increased sales by 20%, what must have happened? And you work down, what's the first effect that you would have looked for? Well, sales must have gone up. Okay. Why would sales have gone up? What was the thing? Okay, we haven't changed the price, so the quantity that we've sold must have gone up. Why would that have happened? I would have expected customers to give more orders or new customers to give me orders, right? So I keep building downwards, and I can literally just do it with bullet points, as long as the bullet points are sequenced from the top to the bottom. And then the last box, which is a square box, so you'll notice that the rounded boxes are all effects. The square box is basically your list of actions that you were planning to take or now realize you should have taken to have realized this expectation. And again, you can build quite a sophisticated diagram from this, or just put it all in a square box in a bullet point form. To say, for us to have launched this offer, the first one is to do a market segmentation, design an offer for every market segment, go and test this offer, use the feedback from the customers to improve it, really roll it out. These were the actions that we should have taken. Once we've done that, we can now check the hypothesis. The only checkpoint we have at this level is we didn't realize the expectation, right? The reality was either better or worse. That's the only checkpoint we've got to tell us that there's an issue. What we're trying to do by building downwards is we're giving ourselves some additional checkpoints. So the first thing I want to do is, was this actually done? These actions that we agreed to do, were they actually done? And of course, what do you think the most common answer is? Yes, we did them, right? So guess what you should ask? Really? What did you do? No, we did what you told us. No, tell me exactly what did you do? And very quickly, sometimes the mystery goes away, because it's now clear that they never understood what the hell they should be doing, right? Or even if they are correct in telling you what they did, you ask them, how did you do it? And frequently now, the mystery goes away, because you realize they really messed it up. And I'll show you some examples of that. So this is the first check that we want to do, is to say, did we actually do what we said or what we knew we should have? As soon as you're picking up that what you did was not 100% what you should have, you turn the box from green to, say, yellow. If it wasn't done, you make it red. Because now already you can see what's causing the red at the top there, right? We didn't do what we're supposed to. Guess what? No wonder. Ask a person, what's your expectation gap? Well, I set the target of losing 10 kilograms of weight. Very good. Now, for that to have happened, what should have happened? Well, I should have exercised more. Okay, and for that to have happened, I must go and buy the exercise, this new ab machine. That was one of the actions, right? Make it easier, so I don't have an excuse to have to go to the gym. I can do it at home, and then to use it. And then you say, did you do that? Yes, I bought the machine. And you already know where this is going, right? And you say, are you using it? Yes. How are you using it? At least 10 minutes a week. So what did the infomercial say? 15 minutes every day. That's not 15 minutes a week, it's 15 minutes a day, right? So very quickly the mystery is resolved when we do these simple checks, that we actually do what we knew we should have done. Of course, if the mystery isn't resolved and we really tick all the boxes and this box is now green, now it becomes interesting. Because now we want to see where did this causality break down. So we go to the first effect and ask, was this achieved? And again you ask in your most sarcastic voice that you can muster, really? What did you achieve? Right? Can you show me the measurements? And then you keep on asking until you get to the top. And the same color scheme we use, if it's there or mostly there, it's green. Partially there, it's yellow. Not there, it's red. Immediately it points us to where the problem is. So the idea is to have a very simple method where we group all the effects together as a simple checklist, and we group all the actions together as a checklist, and we say, did you actually do this? Really? What did you do? How did you do it? Did you achieve these? Really? What did you achieve? How did you measure it? Frequently the mystery goes away. And then it points us to where was the bad assumption, right? And that's really the new insight at the bottom here, is why the change that we made either couldn't have been implemented or wasn't sufficient to get the results. And that also highlights what the original bad assumption was. The bad assumption was that these changes could be implemented or that they were necessary and sufficient. To end up with, I want to take you through a few examples, some that I think was quite interesting, and then end up with some lessons learned. So in the private sector, we've worked on cases where companies have built a decisive competitive advantage, but they failed to capitalize on it. How do we know that they failed to capitalize on it? Because they're not making money, and yet all their customers love them. They've got best supplier certificates all over the world, but they don't make money, right? So why is that the case? Can we learn from this experience? Why so many change initiatives are failing? Specifically, I've been working with SAP on SAP implementations. Very powerful technology, should dramatically impact limitations of taking long to execute critical business processes or taking long to make better decisions at all levels, and yet most don't realize the value. Why not? In the public sector, dealing with the Institute with Children with Autism in the USA to find out why some of the counselors are so much better than the rest. They've got success rates of 80%, whereas the normal ones have success rate of 30 to 40%. What can we learn from the experience by studying what the top people are doing? The public health policy, I'm going to show that example, and then from a personal perspective, we run this program called the Odyssey program, where we teach people how to apply these tools to their own lives, to kind of look at the aspects of their life that might be in the red, you know. Starting to run out of time. I wanted to retire by 40. I'm now 41, not yet retired. Okay, it's keeping me up at night. Let's investigate it, see what went wrong. So let me take you through the first example, public sector example. In 1999, the US Department of Health came up with an initiative called Healthy People 2010. And in this initiative, they identified 467 objectives to make Americans more healthy. I was approached when I sent a note out to say, I've got this, what I think is a pretty nice tool. I'm looking for cases to try it on. I got a message back to say, I've got a nice case for you. It was related to the tobacco part, tobacco use, objective number 27. Basically what this objective was to move from this type of warning on cigarette packets to that type of warning on cigarette packets. And the expectation was that as a result of this dramatic change in the size of the warning and the graphic nature of the warning, that there will be a dramatic reduction in the number of people that smoke and a dramatic increase in the number of people that try to quit. Of course, there were other initiatives like banning it from public premises, etc. But this was the specific one that this person was interested in. When she shared the results with me, it was really fascinating. So these were all the lead measurements of things that they were doing, that they were tracking. Were they actually doing what they set out to do? Like, did they increase their excise duty? Yes. The target was to get it to $2 by 2010. The actual was $2.35. The target in media print advertising was to reduce it from 67% to 49% in magazines. Smoke-free restaurants from 51% down to 28%. Warning coverage, they went from 15% to 50%. So it was actually done. The little checkbox there, was the action taken? Yes, it was. The problem is with the lag measurements. Did this have the desired effect? They started off with a baseline of 24% of people that smoke. Their target was to get it to 12%. After 10 years, it was down to 21%. And by far the majority of that reduction happened almost immediately within the first year or two. Now the question is, what do you think is the lesson that they will learn from this statistics? The reason why she approached me is that the lesson that they learned is, you see, the warnings weren't big enough and gross enough. You can see how we learn that lesson, right? And in many cases that we've analyzed, we get trapped in these vicious cycles. We assume, for example, when I'm working in a country like India, we assume that poverty happens as a result of some things. Let's just say we assume it's as a result of discrimination, right? Now we've put policies in place that removes discrimination. And we still see that poverty exists. It hasn't gone down dramatically. What is our conclusion? You see, we haven't done enough. We never question the fact that discrimination was the number one cause, or still is the number one cause for the poverty. Would have been a simple check to do when you go and ask people in the same community that turned out to be successful, what did you do despite this discriminatory things? I said, hell, I worked very hard. Right, maybe that's the solution. But when you're stuck in a vicious cycle, when you really believe what the cause is, you keep on validating it, right? So we built this analysis and said our expectation gap was that we wanted to go from 24 to 12. We actually went only to 21%. We sat with the team to say, is it still important? Yes, they spend about $190 billion a year on the consequences of smoking-related deaths and illnesses. And of course, it has a dramatic impact on people. And unless they change it, those undesirable effects will not go away. So we went down and we said, for people to have reduced the amount of people that smoke from 24 to 12%, what must have happened? Well, more and more those that smoke or consider to start realize it just ain't worth the risk. For that to have happened, what's the intermediate effect is that every time someone smokes, they and others see the shocking warnings as a reminder of the risk. And the planned change was the law to ensure that 50% of cigarette packets is covered by shocking photos as warnings of the risk. So the question was that really done? Absolutely. Was that really achieved? Well, turns out not quite. And was that achieved? Very little of the desired impact. And of course, the lesson is, what was the basic assumption? Two things. That people that smoke don't know that it's bad for them. If you tested that with a smoker in 1998, what do you think their answer would have been? Of course they know it's bad for them. Second assumption, they want to be frequently reminded. Again, you could have kind of just asked the smoker, would you like to be frequently reminded? Turns out about 3% of them said would have said yes. We think it will really help us to break the habit. The rest, do you know what happened? Massive increase in the sales of covers for cigarette packages. Because it's just not cool anymore to put your Marlboro packet on a table, right? It's quite cool to have a nice cover around it. So that's kind of the essence of this, is that it's so easy to get stuck in a vicious cycle when you believe something is the cause. You take actions to remove it, the results in there, and then your conclusion is, you see, we didn't do enough. We should have done even more. We should have taken 100%. And of course, the conflict that they were facing was, on the one side, to maintain the demand for an even higher percentage coverage, which would cost billions and billions of dollars. Plus, the question is, will it really make an impact? Versus to look for alternatives. And part of looking for alternatives is to say, you know what? People don't stop, not because they know the pot of gold. They're not ignorant of how good their life will be, that they can start tasting food again and stop their partner hassling them. They know the pot of gold. They know the alligator. They know how bad it is for them. Where they're stuck is either with a mermaid, what do you think people are frightened of giving up when they stop smoking? Some people will tell you, you know what, it's a great stress coping mechanism, right? As soon as I feel stressed and overwhelmed, I go outside, I have a bit of peace, I take a smoke, and it actually works. And compared to the alternative, it's definitely quite effective. An alternative, I mean deep depression, right? Years of treatment. Actually quite an effective stress coping mechanism. Of course, what they don't understand, it doesn't actually help with the stress. All it helps is to replenish the nicotine that's causing that anxiety when it drops. So it makes them feel like it's helping, but it's not really helping. But that's the thing that they're terrified of giving up. What are people terrified of gaining that they don't want when they stop? Weight is one of them, right? People say, hell, I'm going to be replacing this with an even worse habit, that's overeating. So unless you can come up with very successful methods to show them that you can stop and not have to give up or face the risk of these bad things that you don't want, the strategy is not going to work. So the assumption is there's no way to change the tactics without facing the risk of being sued or having to admit our tactic failed. This is one of the big fears that the government now has. Because if they admit that this failed, guess what the tobacco guys will do, right? And at the same time, the second plus years, because there's not already good and acceptable alternatives available and knowledge on how to get people to change. Turns out there is. How to Stop Smoking Easy. Have you heard of this book? Easy Way to Stop Smoking. 90% success rate. Gets no funding from government. Crazy. They figured it out already, how to do it, but there's no money for it. And yet there's billions and billions of dollars to invest on things that don't work. So let me look at a second one quickly. Private sector, vendor-managed inventory offer was made into the market. The expectation was that sales would increase by 20%. Turns out it didn't. It increased, but not by 20%, only by 10%. So we build downwards. For that to have happened, existing clients had to buy more, and we also had to increase the selling price for some of the existing clients where there was a very much time-sensitive or availability-sensitive issue where the price of not having stock is huge, and they'd be quite willing to pay premiums for that. So for that to have happened, existing clients has much lower shortages. Existing clients can carry more of our range. Existing clients carry even more of our range. For that to have happened, availability of listed item must improve. Average on the shelf inventory must go down to create space to add some more products. And existing clients do actually give us more shelf space. And then the same on the other side. And these were the actions that we agreed to take. We visit existing clients more, replenishing on actual consumption. We help existing clients set correct buffer levels. Because there's no use if they have a buffer level that's too high and too low, and I just keep on replenishing based on actual consumption, right? And the last one is we show them the impact of fast replenishment on their return on investment so that they will give us more shelf space. And the same with the other two parts. We reduce all unnecessary discounts for better service, and we cut out the wholesalers, which means we get some of their margin. That was the actions that we agreed to do. So when we did the check, what happened? It turns out that the first one was very successfully implemented, and the last one. The rest, not so much. You go back into the shops, and they say, but we're replenishing daily on actual consumption. They sold one, we give them one. Said that you change their buffers. No, they won't allow us to do that. So say, if the buffer was too high, how do you expect him to carry less inventory? Because all that you're doing is replenishing to the buffer. If the buffer was too low, right, and they frequently ran out of stock, how do you expect them to have higher availability if they don't? Oh, no, we can't do that. That's the bad assumption, right, that they won't allow us to do that. And, of course, the conflict that's related to that is, on the one side, I feel pressured to include in my VMI offer a requirement that says, if you're going to accept this, one of the requirements is that we come in and we help you set the right buffer sizes for on-the-shelf inventory. On the other side, there's pressure not to do that. One of the bad assumptions is customers would not be willing to transfer the responsibility for target level calculation to the vendor. Turns out that even the bigger guys, we did a project with Random House Publishing, their clients are Barnes & Noble, Amazon, these guys are pretty sophisticated. Even they allowed us to do that for them because I realized that there's massive benefit. And second bad assumption, we have no way to show that lost sales and our inventory levels after VMI is significantly less than before. Of course, if you didn't have a baseline to start with, it's going to be very difficult to measure if you're improving their inventory levels if you're improving their inventory terms and profitability. So again, establish a baseline as part of your service level agreement with them. So 2 simple examples of how applying this relatively simple method, and both of these, the analysis took about a day, getting the right people in a room together, explaining to them what we're going to do. We're going to look for an important inconsistency. We'll validate its importance. We'll then build downwards from our expectation to see what must have happened and what must have been put in place. And then we go and check and say, really? What did you do? How did you do it? What did you achieve? How did you achieve it? So some of the lessons learned so far, mysteries and surprises are fantastic gifts from reality to learn from experience and make powerful breakthroughs. Please don't ignore them. They really, Goldratt told us that these things are absolute gifts. Like inconsistencies are gifts to scientists because it shows them that there's a need for improving their explanation or their theory. And the same thing in our lives and organizations. Expectation gaps, inconsistencies are gifts. The LFE process, learning from experience, or I like to call it learning from experiment process, just 2 steps. Have the courage to face important inconsistencies. Have the courage to challenge the basic assumptions. Hopefully the process makes it a little bit easier. Applying the process requires having high expectations. This is one of our first lessons that we learned where the process doesn't work, is you ask people, what was your expectation? And they go, I didn't have an expectation. Okay. You had no expectation. No, I didn't want to influence it. Just want to see what happens. So how would you know whether it's worked or not? So have high expectations. The higher, the better. Treating each decision or change as an experiment really helps to change the mindset to say, you know what? It was a decision, but actually the decision is an experiment. What can I learn? What worked? What didn't learn? An important warning from Ellie Goldratt when we were applying this was he said, be very careful of a mode of management of fixing problems. Because what you might be doing is you might be removing alarm signals that's telling you that there's a deeper problem. Right? So be very careful. Take some of these ones and don't fix them. Analyze them. Find out why was there an expectation gap. So why not join us and help further test it? Written a few papers on this. We've got software now to support this. It's a really simple process. We think it can be a lot of fun. Good dynamics that develop. People start laughing when they realize some of the bad assumptions that we've made. Very interesting when they start exploring where else in their life or business they've made a similar bad assumption and exploring what they should be doing differently in those. And remember, the bottleneck is always at the top of the bottle. It's just our own assumptions that limit us. Thank you for the time.